Okay, so class and crime. We've already looked at gender and ethnicity. This is the last part in this section before we look at globalization, crime in the media, and how we control for crime. So as started to do on a post-it note or a flashcard, using those 6 key terms on the top right, how can we explain why the working class commit more crime than the middle class? So this whole section is essentially going back over things we've already looked at, like the Marxist view of crime. All of those key words we have come across before, whether that's be in education or at the beginning of crime. Is it that the working class commit more crime, or is it that the crime that might be being committed is easier to patrol, easier to convict, and easier to police compared to middle class? So have a practice on that. So like I said, this is where we are. You've looked at the statistics and crime in another flipped session that I gave you to do. This part here, social order, social control, that's functionalist Marxist, and all that introductory stuff, all the perspectives, labeling theory, realist. This is all we have left to do, are these 2 points here. So believe it or not, this 30 marker you could probably already have a go at. So again, for a 30 mark, this will always be the same. Apply material from item B and your own knowledge evaluates. In this case, it's sociological explanations for the social distribution of crime and deviance. So the sociological explanations, functionalist, Marxist, labeling theory, realist, of why we have a working class, middle class divide in crime and deviance. Okay, and the item, lots of things you can pull out there. So I want to just show you this. Research is really important in sociology, and a recent podcast that I listened to, I'm really sad. I listened to one that's created by teachers for teachers, and ex-examiners that will get together and have created a podcast. They said that AO2 is the weakest area in sociology, and that students don't go away and research statistics. And actually, the better way to get the marks, I mean, some people do, and that's great, and I love a stat, but the easier way to get the marks are through studies. So here, Farrington and West in the 1990s, not official Office of National Statistics, so we'll come on to what that means in a second. We've got a variety of crimes that are taking place here. The likelihood, or I think it's, yes, it's out of how many thousands of people have committed an offence. And we've got working class, professionals, single parent family, and nuclear family. And it gives us an interesting pattern and trend around who is more likely to commit certain offences. We can pick this apart and say, well, it's a soft statistic. It's not a hard statistic, which is factual based evidence. This is something that can be manipulated. When we're talking about, how to define professional, how do we define what the working class actually looks like? It is quite because this is saying that no professionals commit murder, and that barely any professionals are taking drugs. Well, when we're looking at the politicians, and our MPs who are 100% taking drugs. So this is very much soft statistics that have been manipulated for a reason, usually political, but interesting. And that's the point we can make, that the Crime Survey of England and Wales, another self-report survey that we look at, doesn't collect data on crime and social class because, like I just said, how do we define and even measure what social class looks like. And so the data that we have is based on people's postcodes, data from the prison population, which doesn't tell us anything around who that person is and why they've committed that offence. So the question here is, why do working class people appear to be more likely to be involved in crime? And there are 4 explanations that you'll see here that we are going to unpick and discuss. First comes from theory. Now, all of these we've already looked at. So this is a really nice refresher over the sort of early parts of crime. Starting with strain theory, so Merton, the 5 adaptations to strain, working class are blocked from opportunities and therefore turn to illegitimate means. Subcultural, Cohen and the status frustration, they are stuck in a position that they're not happy with in society. That causes, another word for frustration, that causes them to realise that there is inequality, turn to crime. Chambliss, so the Marxist perspective of criminogenic capitalism, is inherently, in a capitalist society, crime will happen regardless. So it's a rational response to inequality. We can talk about labelling theory, leading to selective law enforcement, leading to police officers patrolling certain areas looking for crime, particularly in the working class. Our left realists who focus on the causes, talking about deprivation, subcultures being marginalised. And then our right realists, where they focus more on punishments, but they do say more of a new right view, not being socialised properly, too dependent on the welfare state, and a lack of community control means that the working class will commit more offences. So nothing here talking about the middle class. And that's the whole debate you would have in this essay. So AO2, a case study from the London riots in 2011. More than 14,000 people took to the streets across England for 3 days. We saw Sports Direct and JD Sports be 2 of the shops that were looted the most. Buildings were destroyed, neighbourhoods were wrecked. And it happened because people were angry in London at the amount of stop and search happening by the police, where it was predominantly, as we know already, focused towards those individuals in different ethnic minorities. And people kicked up a fuss. The rioters were from disadvantaged communities. They were angry at the way that the police dealt with certain situations, the disproportionate use of stop and search. And Bauman calls them defective consumers. So they had nowhere, he argued, to express their anger. And the way they did it was through the shops. So things were looted, they were stealing things, burning things. And Hall, who we've already discussed in Marxism, the riots were an expression of the situation of the urban poor in a post-political present. They were annoyed at the situation, but had no way to articulate their frustration, particularly, maybe because they were marginalised. Right realists would say they weren't socialised. And so rioting was them acting out their annoyance. Now, obviously, people will go against that and say, well, there are other ways to do it rather than looting JD Sports. Other people would support this and say, well, if you feel so, what's the word? If you are neglected in society, if you are disadvantaged, marginalised, prejudiced, violence and aggression is the only way to get your point across. So there's some interesting parts there that we can pick out. Other explanations that we have then are talking about how, more about statistics. They're socially constructed. They are a way of focusing on street crime. Like I said, it's more detectable. David Cameron's government was focused on zero tolerance policing. And so what we tended to find was the working class, those poorer people in society, were receiving higher punishments, more time in prison, for smaller crimes. And I don't know if you remember this case, Brock Turner, he was a swimmer. I think his dad was an MP, potentially, accused of sexually assaulting and raping, maybe, was it? 2 or 3 girls, I think, or date raping. I can't quite remember, to Google it. But his dad paid off his case. The judge said, oh, but it's such a waste, because he was incredibly intelligent and he had this fantastic swimming career in front of him. So his dad sort of paid it off, and that was that. More likely to be let off. Whereas our working class, you might not have access to that cultural capital, less likely to have that. So again, differences between the two. Oh, forget I put that in. So white collar and corporate crime, two things we've already discussed again. Oh, how do I? Oh, I can't go back on that. That's annoying. White collar and corporate crime then. So if you have a middle class individual who is committing offences against a company, that's white collar. They are doing it without repercussions. They might have intelligence, they might have credibility in order to do that and to hide it. And corporate crime here, committed by a corporation or an individual on behalf of a company which will benefit them. So if they have goals to meet, if they need to get certain criteria, then they might turn to illegitimate means in order to achieve that. So Citizens Bank, don't think it's around anymore. When people put a lower amount on the deposit slip, back in the day when you had to deposit money into your bank, they would take a cut of it. So then there was less money actually being deposited. And there's loads of examples of corporate crime if you pop it into Google and put extra AO2, but it's less reported on because of the standing of those in charge. Another part of AO2 then, Starbucks and the tax fraud. Reportedly paid 8.6 million in corporate tax over 14 years. Huge investigation. Starbucks in the UK reported losses, didn't have to pay corporation tax. Essentially, they just got away with it because of the standing and the position that they have. Donald Trump is another good example of this, not paying tax. Rishi Sunak's wife, there's hundreds. Jimmy Carr. So lots we can use for AO2 around that. So I've just got some examples here. Again, we did some of this already, corporate and white collar, but it might be good just to Google some of these, add some examples to your notes. And then again, all of this we have already covered. So this is just a reflection of Marxism, essentially. So why are they underreported in the statistics? Well, hard to detect, they're hidden from view, they're victimless crimes, they benefit the parties involved. You need specialist investigators, your local police can't do that. They might not have the skills to do that. Victims blame themselves for being risky, so with the apps or the Royal Mail can't deliver this parcel to you. People having money taken from them, they're blaming themselves. So it's like there's no way it will be reported as a crime because I shouldn't have been so stupid as to do it. And they're probably embarrassed. Not labelled as criminal because the criminal justice system are professional bodies and they might be protecting people that they know. And we see a higher not guilty verdict due to maybe bias and stereotypes. So completely underreported. Again, a reflection of what we've already discussed. Theory, why do we see these things happen? Strain theory, middle class people do still face the strain from relative deprivation, but maybe it's more greed. Social media presenting all these things we should have and we should buy, and how someone else your age is living their life, and it makes people greedy. Control theory, there is no personal victim. So then that moral dilemma is weakened. People don't feel bad for what they've done, especially as a business. It then encourages competition, which can ultimately lead to crime. And then lastly on here, edge work. Remember we talked about crime being sexy, crime being they're curious, they're risk-taking, thrill-seeking. And some people do it just for that, just for the adrenaline rush of committing a crime. So last few parts here then, a couple of other explanations which I quite like, and I think they make a lot of sense. So a key word here, Baldwin and Bottoms, unfortunate name, blame tipping for urban decline. Now tipping, if you think of it like going to the Trowbridge Recycling Centre, it's called a tip or a dump. If we take let's take Trowbridge, and if the local people view that area as, as a tip, as a dump, as dwindling into decline, that's going to affect how they treat the area and how other people have treated it as well, and we might see more crime. So if we've got law-abiding people who see the area that they live changing for the worse because of antisocial behaviour, drinking on the streets, graffiti, they might move. So let's take, John and Barbara, they live in Hilperton. They like Hilperton, it's great there. But all of a sudden, there's loads of drinking on the street. There probably is. There's graffiti. They're not going to feel comfortable. They're going to think that place has tipped into decline. So John and Barbara move away and then replaced by friends and family or relatives of those responsible for the antisocial behaviour. So let's say you've got, I don't know, Bill on the streets drinking with his friend Tracy, and where am I going with this? And then, I don't know, let's say their friends, Stacey and Frank, move into the area. We're then seeing antisocial families outweighing quote unquote respectable families. So the area is then tipped, regarded by the police as a problem. Hoping that analogy made sense. Very similar to the broken windows theory that we spoke about. As soon as we've got a rough area, people don't look after it, it spirals and gets worse and worse. And this is illustrated by a nice piece of AO2 in Manchester. 75,000 people are out on a Friday and Saturday night, and about 75% of all violent incidents in those areas occur between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. at the weekend. So more people going out, more young people going out clubbing, because there's more pubs and clubs, more people are drunk, getting into fights, and then those respectable members leave, move out of the area, more young people move in, this cycle continues. Now, whether or not that's the case now with COVID and lots of pubs and clubs are shutting, might be interesting to see if, how many violent incidents take place at the weekend when people are likely to be intoxicated. So that's quite interesting, I think. The nocturnal economy, that's people going out, getting drunk, like we've just said. And it emerged mainly because of the 24-hour license in 2005. So you could buy drinks all throughout the night, off license, staying open till late. So we're seeing more violence happening because more people are drinking. Okay, that's that for social class. So again, I'll go back to that question we looked at the start. Knowing what you know now, how could you add to that plan? You've got some good ideas there. And then I have this as a plan. I've given you the points that you could add to and extend them.